I'm going to start by introducing the topic for the session, and that is modernity, equality, and women's rights in Islam. This will be a panel format session, so that will include, of course, our Dr. Shehzad Saleem, but we're going to also have two guest contributors, which I will introduce. But before that, I'd just like to make a few remarks. And basically, we all are quite familiar with Dr. Shehzad Saleem's background. He did complete his PhD from the University of Wales on focusing on Quran transmission history. But in addition to that, he's an inheritor of a legacy of scholarship from the subcontinent, starting with Hamiduddin Farahi, Amin Hassan Aslahi, and Javed Ahmad Ghamdi. And the development of this school of thought, we often refer to this by the Farahi school. And the question, one of the questions that we want to ask in this session is, can the Farahi school offer an opportunity to help resolve some of the perceived conflicts between modernity and women's rights in Islam? Are the conflicts between Islam and modern women's rights irreconcilable, or is this a problem of the readers and interpreters of the Quran and Sunnah, who have primarily been males living in a male-dominated society? Or is this a problem of an unnecessary, rigid version of modernity that is hostile to traditional values? So to help us probe and challenge Dr. Saleem on these questions, we're privileged to have two special guests who are both scholars of modern disciplines from the local community. I can ask them each to join us on stage one by one, and I'll introduce them as they come. So first I'm going to ask Dr. Sadia Akrampal to please join us on stage. Dr. Akrampal is a member of the Ontario College of Psychologists, a clinical psychologist with over 25 years of experience. She received her doctorate from the University of Toronto, and she has several published articles and books, and a special interest in issues of women's rights, gender-based analysis, and issues of diversity and equity more broadly. So another hand for Dr. Sadia Akrampal. And Bassam, thank you for doing the flower boy job. Great job. And our next guest is Dr. Ali Hassan Zadi. Can I ask Dr. Zadi to join us on stage? So Dr. Ali Zadi is an associate professor and chair of global studies at Wilfrid Laurier University. He's received his PhD in sociology from York in 2007, and his research interests include Islam and modernity, religion and secularism, cultural globalization, intercultural dialogue and critique, and comparative hermeneutics. So we have a very qualified guest panel, and thank you, Mariam, for delivering the flowers again. Great job to have the kids involved. That's what we want. So that's the end of the introductions, and I'm going to ask Dr. Sadia Akrampal to come to the podium first and give us her opening statements.
Assalamu alaikum. So today's topic is modernity, equality, and women's rights in Islam. So without going into complex concepts of modernity and equality, I am going to make it a very simple talk about what is happening practically in our everyday life and why there is a need to have modernity as a call for today. So before I go ahead with this topic, I'm going to make small change here. I'm going to change the topic to modernity, equity, and women's rights. The reason why I'm adding equity over there is because okay, so change. So, okay, yeah, sure. The reason I am changing equality to equity is, okay, so this is the one? Okay. So look at this. There are three people here. They want to watch this game. Three different sizes. Based on equality, होना तो ये चाहिए कि तीनों बंदों को हमने एक एक दिया वो enjoy कर सकें, लेकिन equality वो मकसद पूरा नहीं करती है. So we are changing it to equity because हमारे पास तीन boxes हैं. So we have 3 people with different heights, so meeting their needs and dividing it differently so that all 3 of them can enjoy this sport. Okay. So equity means treatment of all based on their individual needs. Before we unfold the topic today, we need to allow ourselves to deconstruct, क्योंकि हमारे सबके काफ़ी कॉन्सेप्ट्स होते हैं औरतों के मुतालिक, जैसे अभी कई क्वेश्चंस भी किए गए, तो then we need to reconstruct some of the concepts to understand women's rights and modernity, and then use Islamic knowledge and understanding what is God's message and how it is interpreted and communicated in all of us. So usually what happens whenever there's discussion about women, like even historically you see, it's very rare that women are part of the discussion, because for centuries it is considered a norm to have discussion about women without having women in there. So there's a saying, if you are not part of the table, you are part on the menu. So I think women have been part of menu for years because they are not part of the table. From psychological perspective, incongruence is created within individuals, and then it is manifested in mental health problems, which we translate in God's message, especially what happens in our everyday life. When we translate God's message in oppressive and non-inclusive manner, there are complexities. This incongruence also sets a stage for dissonance between women and also overall society. All these people sitting here in this gathering today, सबका किसी ना किसी तरीके से औरतों के साथ ताल्लुक है. कोई बंदा ये नहीं कह सकता कि I am not connected with women, because you have connection. To understand modernity, equity, and women, we need to see the evolution of societies. Years ago, आपको पता होगा, historically, societies transferred from labor ages to agriculture ages. And the one who was powerful was respected. And because there was physical power that was credited at that time, मर्दों के पास power थी. औरतें were considered powerless. If you pay a bit attention to semantics that we use even today, his story, female, woman, human, she, even to describe the concept of God, we are using up until now he. जब पूछो, gender नहीं है God का, but why we are using pronoun? Because unconsciously we are aware of it. In order to describe something powerful, we are using pronoun he. I can go on and on with semantics, but this is not the topic today. So cut the story short, go back to societies. When society's structure changed from agriculture to industrial, women were allowed to go and work in factories or industries because that was the need of that time. And women were able to work behind these machines, but they were not allowed to use their brain. So इसलिए कहते हैं कि ज़रूरत के तहत, it's okay, they can come out. So what happened now, let's make it a little bit short now. The current age is a technological age where technical capabilities and mental powers matter as compared to strength, the physical strength, I mean. Now the problem is women have the sharpness of mind, vision to create structures, endurance to produce, and analyze systematically. The problem is how to sustain the power within those hands that used to be powerful. So उसके लिए the name of religion has been used. Okay. So since I am a psychologist, so I am going to use psychological understanding of the concept. Okay, so I'm going to use psychoanalytic theory for the personality development. So usually what they say, in order to develop healthy personality, these 3 aspects of our personality should be interconnected and gratified. If any aspect is overly or underly gratified, तो उसका नतीजा क्या होता है कि personality development में disturbances होती हैं. So 8 का जो है वो basic rule player principle पे, ego reality पे, और super ego जो है वो morality के basis पे होता है. तो अगर हम इसको देखें psychological sense में, तो क्या होता है कि जो सुपर ईगो है a lot of religious practices, if you see, they're emphasizing a lot on the development of superego. वो इतनी severe, इतनी harsh हो जाती है कि इंसान के अंदर वो self critical वो बहुत ज़्यादा हो जाता है, guilt की feelings रहती हैं, जिसका नतीजा क्या होता है कि there's no pleasure, no reality testing. So sometimes when I see women, especially in my clinical practice, what happens, they come with a lot of guilt, low self-esteem, low self-image. The reason is they are so much suppressed over there under the influence of superego कि उनके पास वो समझते हैं कि प्लेयर पे उनका कोई right नहीं है. There is no reality check because there is no gratification of ego over there. So these concepts can be further stemmed or maintained by the role models. So होता क्या है कि I'm not going to go details for the religious verses and stuff because Dr. Saab is going to take his time. Okay, I'm already getting the warning. I'm a mental health practitioner and community activist. So I will use this concept, what is happening with the role models. हमारे पास मर्दों के पास इतने role models ही नहीं हैं, so that they can produce the concept that I'm going to talk about now, and that is about healthy role models. Okay, so the fear that I mentioned before has manipulated that superego. And instead of producing conscious individuals, जैसे आपने भी अपनी talk में बताया जो consciousness to produce करनी है, वो actually I'm considering that as the moral conscious in individuals is very important. The problem क्या होता है कि हमारे यहाँ जो role model नहीं होते, वो conscious development नहीं होती है. और चूँकि हमारी society में concept of ideal man is paired with the diseased morality, जिसको हम कहते हैं कि lack of consciousness, वो काफ़ी अर्से तक जब पेयरिंग होती रहती है, हमारी सोसाइटी बाद में उसी मॉडल को रीइंफोर्स करती है. सो ये चीज़ें जो है अगर आप देखो तो क्लासिकल कंडीशनिंग में वो पेयरिंग कर रहे होते हैं और वो ऑपरेंट कंडीशनिंग डेवलप होती है. व्हेन आई सी वुमेन, I'm going to quote example of one of my clients here, जिसने मुझे कहा कि he said, okay, you know what, I think we have two gods. तो मैंने उससे बड़े हैरान होकर पूछा, मैंने कहा, I think you are a Muslim and Muslims believe in one God. तो उसने हंस के बोला, उसने कहा कि one is the real God who created the universe and other one is the one these religious institutions have created for us. I think the one who created the world is very loving, generous and forgiving, but the one manufactured within these institutions is rigid and oppressive. So this is what is happening. When we are raising children under the constant fear, some they want to leave religion when time permits, and others become fanatic and extremists. So under the influence of diseased morality and start dictating what is right and what is wrong without having the understanding, and they're using very strict interpretations based on whatever their understanding of Islam is. And this is what it creates Islamophobia. I will not go into detail for that, but just to give you an idea, women in various parts of the world are oppressed. You can see in some parts of the world, women are not allowed to go to school. They cannot even walk around with both eyes. They are allowed only to see through one eye. Female genital mutilation, marrying with the Quran, no right to choose your life partner, not to participate in politics or rule a country. This is all done in the name of religion, Islam. In many, not only particularly Islam, but many religions too, but particularly when we are talking about Islam, then we have to pay extra attention what we are doing with our society. So I'm not blaming men here. The problem is having the role models with diseased morality and transferring this learning to the next generation. The concept of role models with diseased morality and the way learning is transferred from one generation to another generation is basically conditioned. And this is causing perpetual oppression. I just want to quote one of my clients saying, she said, if I am asked to come back to this world, I would beg God not to make me woman again. This blame game, this is another interesting phenomena. If you see, women are kept in their homes, उनको बाहर नहीं जाए दिया जाता because this can be sexually provocative for men. So think about that. You're oppressing women, but then they are victims, but they are presented as perpetrators. कि उनको बाहर इसलिए नहीं निकलने दिया जाता कि they can excite us sexually. So rather than controlling and managing their own impulses, they are putting this blame on women that they should be controlled so that we should not be provocative. So this is a very interesting phenomenon which we need to observe very closely, that what is happening with women and how they are oppressed. So this blame game causes unconscious guilt in women, which is manifested in the form of mental health complexities. Our societies are changing. The societal frameworks need to be changed. This is why we have fiqh and ijtihad. We are no longer going to fields. We have washrooms. Life has been changed. We are not using mud to clean our hands. We are using paper towels. We are using air dryers. So then why we are forcing women to live like centuries ago, the life that was demand of that particular society maybe, but then we are presenting this as Islamic orders. So I think scholars need to step forward and see what needs to be done, how to model these things so that we can meet the current demands. Okay, thank you. Thank you for listening.
Dr. Zadi, your 5-minute opening statement, please.
बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम अस्सलाम वालेकुम वरहमतुल्लाहि वबरकातुहू। पहले तो मैं अपना शुक्रगुजार अर्ज़ करना चाहूँगा शान भाई आपका और फैसल भाई, आपने मुझे दावत दी to address the audience, so I'm very grateful. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आपका। अच्छा, मेरी जो ट्रेनिंग है वो as a sociologist है, social theorist training. So actually I'm grateful that we had a psychologist. Now I'm going to try to present a sociological perspective on the issue of equality and modernity. So I'm not a religious scholar, I'm not a scholar of the Quran. I try to live up to the tenets of my faith. I try to be a believer, and of course I fail to live up to my own ideals, as we all do. But you try to live up to your ideals is the best that you can do. Now the question of Islam and equality and modernity, I think, really presupposes where is it that we are coming from when we're asking this question. What is our bias? What is our preconception? What is our cultural baggage when we're asking this question? कहाँ से हम आ रहे हैं? किस मकसद से हम सवाल ये पूछा जा रहा है हमसे? और किस मकसद से हम खुद पूछ रहे हैं ये सवाल? क्या हम कलेक्टिविस्ट ओरिएंटेशन से आ रहे हैं या इंडिविजुअलिस्ट ओरिएंटेशन से आ रहे हैं? क्योंकि if you're thinking about collectivist orientation, you have a different understanding of equality than an individualist orientation. Are you coming from a liberal perspective or a conservative perspective? That also informs how you think of equality. Are you coming from a religious or a secular perspective? Sociology में हमारे लिए जो ये term है, इसके लिए हम इसको कहेंगे cultural baggage के अलावा हम कहेंगे we have horizons, cultural horizons. Now cultural horizons क्या होते हैं? They're limits on our understanding. So we have limits on our understanding of the idea of equality, and we have limits on the understanding of the Quran itself because of our horizons, our baggage, our cultural background. अब हम modern individuals, 21st century individuals कुरान को पढ़ रहे हैं तो किस बुनियाद से पढ़ रहे हैं, किस बेसिस से पढ़ रहे हैं, किस अंडरस्टैंडिंग से पढ़ रहे हैं? ज़ाहिर है हमारे कुछ बायसेस हैं ना, प्रेजुडिसेस हैं, प्रीकंसेप्शंस हैं. जब आप इक्वालिटी का ये सवाल खड़ा करते हैं तो अगर आप अपने आप को 7वीं सदी में डालें, उस नज़रिए से देखें कि जो जहालत और जहालिया का ज़माना था, उस ज़माने में जब ये बात इब्तदा की गई या इंट्रोड्यूस की गई कि तुम सबको एक ही नफ्स से पैदा किया गया. We have created you from a single soul. The Quran is saying we have created you from a single soul, and from that single soul we have created its mate. ये नहीं कहा जा रहा है कि we created you from a male soul या female soul. It's saying we created you all from a single soul. Now that single soul could either be male or female, or both, or neither. तो कुरान में प्रायोरिटी नहीं दी जा रही है to a male nor to a female. It's saying we created you from a single soul, and from that single soul we created its mate. Mate, male भी हो सकता है, female भी हो सकता है. Anyway, the point is कि कोई प्रायोरिटी नहीं दी जा रही है. जिस तरह अक्सर हमारे जो रवायात हैं या इजराइलियात हैं, in our traditions we have this idea that women was created from Adam's rib, and because the rib is secondary, that means the women are inferior. This is something that we have inherited from the Judeo-Christian heritage. But it's not actually in the Quranic text itself. So if you put yourself back into the 7th century, you'll realize that this was a very radical idea that we are created from a single soul, and that single soul is neither male nor female. It's only when its mate is created that you have male and female. And of course then they're equal. अब सवाल हो गया ठीक है ontological यानी कि हमारी जो real essence है वो equal हो गया. अब हमसे पूछा जाता है कि okay, that's fine in theory, but what about your practice? अब मुसलमानों की जो practice है, अब उसको अगर देखा जाए 21वीं सदी में, तो हमें वो equality नहीं नज़र आती. In fact, my wife, जब शान भाई और फैसल भाई ने मुझे invitation दी, तो मैंने उनसे आज जिक्र किया कि she said she was going to come, unfortunately तबीयत नहीं ठीक थी, वो आ नहीं सकी, तो उन्होंने पूछा कि तुम मर्द सब बात करोगे औरतों की इक्वालिटी पे? मैंने कहा yes, एक खातून होंगी, there will be one lady, but it's going to be mostly men. She said फिर तो वही बातें तुम दोहरा रहे हो, you're saying the same things over and over again, you're talking about equality from a man's perspective. We have to take that criticism, ये तंकीद बात जायज़ है. And even ये भी हमें मानना पड़ेगा, वक्त की कमी की वजह से I'm going to ignore most of my notes, but ये हमें मानना पड़ेगा कि even though the Quran recognizes the essential equality of men and women, as I pointed out with respect to that verse about the creation of the soul, the language of the Quran is the language of 7th century Arabia. And the audience of the Prophet was, in the first instance, men in Arabia. Now the message of the Quran is timeless, हर ज़माने के लिए, हर एक के लिए है, लेकिन उसमें कुछ आयत हैं जो कि मखसूस वक्त के लिए थी और मखसूस ऑडियंस के लिए थी. मुखातिब हो रहे थे रसूलुल्लाह सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम in general to men. ज़ाहिर ख़वातीन भी थीं, आती थीं, they would ask questions, but in general he was addressing men. So the Quran's tone and language is one that is a male-centric. From a sociological perspective, this is what we would say. Dr. Saleem will possibly disagree with me. We had this conversation on Monday about the language itself. But as Dr. Akram Pal pointed out, with respect to English pronouns, and English terms, male and female, history rather than herstory, even the word she, includes he in it, or woman, and so on. Similarly, the language of 7th century Arabia, the Arabic, has certain gendered norms in it. अब जिस तरह सूरज के लिए जो अल्फाज है शम्स, in the Arabic language, it's a male pronoun for Shams because of the majesty and intensity and the heat of the sun. And the moon is a feminine pronoun because of the beauty and the coolness of the moon. This is just basically the language itself is gendered. So the way in which it's addressing its audience necessarily captures something of that language. Unfortunately for us as Muslims in the 21st century, and I would say over our tradition, we have failed to recognize the essential message of the Quran from its context in which it was delivered in 7th century Arabia, and the language in which it was delivered to the Prophet ﷺ and to the Makkans and Ahl Kitab and so on and so forth. I guess I'm running out of time or out of time. So let me say the last thing. Aksar kaha jata hai, often the slogan that Muslims use, back to the Quran. Back to the Quran. ये बड़ा उठा था ये slogan 80s, 90s and early 2000s में जो Islamists, the fundamentalists, the Islamists, they say, oh, all the solutions are in the Quran. We just have to go back to the Quran. As if the Quran is a step-by-step manual. As if God has given you a step-by-step manual and it's like this. As if God doesn't want to try us or challenge us. It's not that easy. Because every religious community, not just Muslims, but especially Muslims, every religious community has to understand what is the timeless message and how do they apply that timeless message in their time-bound and culture-bound lives. The Quran is, and the message of the Quran is rooted in a particular time and in a particular context, but it's got timeless aspects to it that we have to understand. But then we have to apply them in our particular time, in our particular context. This is a very difficult task. कोई आसान काम नहीं है. ना ही इसका काम आसान होना था. Allah Ta'ala wants to challenge us, भाई. हर इंसान को challenge करना है कि क्या तुम वाकई में समझ पाओगे इस मैसेज को? क्या तुम वाकई में इसको तुम जी पाओगे? Will you be able to live up to the message? This is a challenge. It's not so simple, oh, just pick up the Quran and read it and you'll apply it. And भाई, step by step manual 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 तो हमें दी नहीं गई है. Dr. Shehzad Saleem साहब कह रहे थे कि we need manuals as parents. I agree with you 100%. The Quran is a deep, deep message which requires a lot of interpretation and a lot of understanding. And this is why we need scholars to help us understand it and interpret it. This is why it's not enough to just go online and read by yourself about Islam or the Quran on the internet and say, ab to mujhe samajh aa gaya. No. This idea that we have in the 21st century that everybody can be a scholar for him or herself by just going on the internet and Googling what is equality in Islam. Google is helpful as a tool, but we still need scholars to help us interpret the message and to live it in our times. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zaidi. Dr. Shehzad Saleem, आप से request है कि if you can give a response to the opening statements.
So, thank you very much, Dr. Paul and Dr. Zaidi. It has been a very enlightening opening statement that both of you gave. Briefly, probably I'll comment collectively and in part individually on some of the things that you have mentioned. Taking cue from Dr. Paul, one of your clients who said that there are two gods. One is the God who created this universe, and the other God is the one that we find in our madrasas and our other, or manufactured by our religious leaders or religious pundits. So I think this is an absolutely true concept and absolutely right, because you find that the concept of God that we really have in the Quran is entirely different from the concept that we generally give our children, or which our seminaries or madrasas teach our children. And the reason for that, one of the reasons I would say, is the patriarchal setup or the patriarchy, which has generally been at the helm of affairs. And it's not just religion which has suffered at the hands of patriarchy. I think you would all agree that it's almost every sector of our society, whether it's psychology or sociology or medical science or engineering, patriarchal tendencies have always downplayed and they have discriminated between men and women. And it is just probably in recent times that women have been able to voice their concerns. Otherwise, in the last maybe a good, until 1927, you'll find that the right to suffrage or to vote was not to women. So I think in the last maybe 2,000 years, the way women have been oppressed and the way they have been talked about is one area in which patriarchy has a big role to play. But coming to the Quran, I would just think that you see, the Quran has been revealed in a language, and that language is something which the Almighty adopted because it was the language of the times of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And being a patriarchal society, as you just mentioned, that why is it that God has been mentioned with a male pronoun and not or neuter pronoun maybe, or something which is something else, or maybe a genderless sort of a God. You see, we need to understand probably, and this is my understanding, which can be absolutely incorrect, that the Quran has been revealed in a language in which the people of those times were used to, and for them the concept of power and authority was always, and it always manifested in the male gender. And in a very similar tone, you would say that why is it that there were not prophets who were women? We have all prophets as men, at least the ones that we know. Again, I would say the dynamics of the society in which the Quran was revealed, which maybe has just started to change today, was one in which a female prophet would never have been accepted in this case. So you see, it's not that, what I'm trying to say is that whether you have male prophets or whether you have the male pronoun for God, the reason for this is more linguistic and is more found in the, it's more grounded in this conditions of those times, and because of the fact that people would only accept men in certain roles. But as Dr. Zaidi has also rightly pointed out, that as far as the Quran is concerned, it does not make this distinction between men and women in any way. Not only the verse that he is pointed to, but I think there is another very important verse in Surah Hujurat which says, Ya ayyuhan nas inna khalaqnakum min zakarin wa unsa. Although in Surah Nisa, the one that he referred to, the gender is not mentioned, but in Surah Hujurat it is explicitly said that we have created mankind from a single pair of man and woman, signaling the fact that they are our progenitors and they are equal as human beings, and they have to be regarded so. And I regard it to be one of the forgotten verses of the Quran, and which has to be highlighted. So the thing that I would also stress is that as far as the interpretation of the Quran is concerned, today we are facing an interpretation which is heavily marginalized, it is heavily, I would say, colored by the vision of our traditionalists, the way they have interpreted the Quran, and that is something of a tradition which has taken the shape of so many thousands of years. And as far as interpreting the Quran is concerned, this is something which has to be an ongoing task. This is something which minds should come together and always interpret what the Quran has said. What has been said once and for all is not the word of God itself. So we are on the one hand dealing with the Quran, and on the other hand with certain interpretations of the Quran. So we should remember that the way it has been interpreted cannot always be the correct interpretation. It's like understanding the Quran in each of our eras and times and trying to make our own contribution. And because we are severely lacking in that, our Muslim society is not conducive to interpretation or to revisiting certain verses the way they have been interpreted. And not only the Quran, I would say there are some other misconceptions which are found in Hadith literature as well. And the way they actually, if I use the word demean women, is appalling. For example, there is a narrative which says that the Prophet is reported to have said that women have bad omen, houses have bad omen, and a horse has a bad omen. So there are three things in which there is bad omen. In fact, the word used in the Hadith is nahusat. And when Aisha radiallahu anha, she came to know of this narrative, she said that look how people are narrating it without realizing that this is not what the Prophet said. What he said was that the Arabs believed that this nahusa is in a woman, is in a house, and is in a horse. So you see, in spite of this correction by Aisha radiallahu anha, at times we still find men quoting this hadith which has been actually discarded. So the other point that I would make here is that besides this interpretation in the Quran, which is heavily colored because of patriarchal tendencies, very similar, if not even more significant, I would say man-centric or even women-demeaning interpretation you'll find in a lot of narratives. I've just cited one. And because I have a very small publication on this topic, in which I have tried to analyze all those ahadiths, which sort of give this impression that women are inferior creatures as men. And not only that, but as some of the Quranic verses as well, which I think they need to be reinterpreted and revisited. And because of the fact that we think that our religious clergy probably is homogeneous, perhaps has the same view, that we tend to think that this is what Quran itself says. So my submission to you, very respected colleagues, would be that we need to understand that this is an interpretation made by human beings. And all interpretations made by human beings, they're liable to correction, they're liable to improvement. And this is the task that we face today, and the challenge, perhaps the greatest challenge in the academic world which Muslims face today. And I really welcome both these keynotes from both of you. And I think that it's a time for us to awaken ourselves and call upon scholars that they have to come to grips, and they have to answer the challenges we face, and at the same time they have to answer very honestly. I mean, either they have to accept this fact that the Quran or Hadith or religion as a whole relegates a woman to a secondary position. Either they accept this wholeheartedly, or if this is not the case, then they have to, I mean, re-understand or reinterpret some of the directives which give us this impression. Thank you.
Okay, we're probably going to go a little bit over Maghrib time, but anyone who's fasting at 9:04, at 9:04, at 9:04, I'll ask to just make their way down, I believe in that direction, to grab a date and water to open their fast. But we're gonna keep the remaining discussion brief. But I'm gonna ask Dr. Akrampal and Dr. Zaidi to ask one question, limited to about a minute, from Dr. Shehzad Saleem, and he can give us a 5-minute response.
So thank you very much for the response. It was really good. We need to reread and re-understand, okay, deconstruct and reconstruct. एक दफ़ा मुझे किसी ने पूछा, मेरी फ्रेंड ने, कि ट्रांसलेशन के ऊपर बात हो रही थी, and she asked me a question, तुमने पूरा कुरान ट्रांसलेशन से पढ़ लिया है? And that I was really astonished to hear that, कि पूरा तो शायद मैं तब तक ना पढ़ सकूं, because it is so vast, but the content is so thought-provoking कि आप एक कितनी दफ़ा भी पढ़ोगे, जितनी दफ़ा भी पढ़ोगे, I think you get more ideas generated from there. So I think this is a constant process of learning. We cannot say कि मैं finish कर लिया है, 2 दफ़ा पढ़ लिया है. There is no race, there is no game. It depends on mental understanding. So my question is, जैसे मैंने अभी बोला कि usually क्या होता है कि what is taught in our culture or usually कि औरत की इज़्ज़त माँ के रेफरेंस से या सिस्टर के रेफरेंस से या आपकी किसी कनेक्शन के रेफरेंस से सिखाई जाती है. So I think what needs to be done to train our role models कि औरत की इज़्ज़त औरत के हिसाब से सिखाई जाए. We need to train our male or society को कि औरत को as औरत accept किया जाए. As कि उसकी आपकी, because the problem happens, what you see in many incidents like acid facing or rape incident stuff, अपनी औरत की तो हम इज़्ज़त करेंगे. When we meet with women in the social setting, we don't understand how to behave. So how can we create this kind of culture where we respect women as individuals, not only when they are associated with you through some kind of relation?
That's a very interesting question, and you, as you rightly said, that actually it's not that it's in her various roles that she needs to be recognized, for example, as a mother or a sister or as a daughter, but the fact that she is a woman. And I think once again, as I just referred to the Quranic verse, that we have to make this case that scriptures themselves are in support of the fact that men and women, they are the progenitors, they are equal they have been given equal rights. And as you just rightly said, that it is basically our cultural influence, a lot of things which belong to culture, and because our culture has been patriarchal. And in the Eastern society, you'll find feudalism, which is also something which cements patriarchy, that we find such heinous practices as honor killings or female circumcision or marrying the Quran, which you just referred to. So I think it's basically a question of either a misrepresentation of religion, or it's a question of culture invading religion, or it's a question of ignorance regarding religion. So to me, I think perhaps the only way out is to get sound education of religion from the Quran. And I think you might be remembering that this is about 20 years ago when Time magazine, maybe more, 30 years ago I think, when Time magazine published a lead article, and there was a lead on the front page. It said that the Quran was the greatest feminist document of its own times, because the reforms that it introduced in the Arab Jahiliyyah were actually so revolutionary. So I think what we need to do is putting it in another way, that we have to come back to the Quran in a positive way and see that is culture invading our interpretations? Is it that we have those patriarchal tendency which are overlapping on our interpretations, and which I think is the case in most situations. So I would say a pure and a very refined approach in understanding the Quran from the Quran itself and giving it due importance, because I think in my study of the Quran, I find it to be so supportive of women's rights, and it is just a question of understanding that the Quran assigns different roles to men and women, and to assign different roles to men and women does not mean that one of them is inferior and the other one is superior. They have different roles to play, and they are equally important. So perhaps this is once again an issue in which purely the religious interpretation has to be reinterpreted or re-understood and discussed a lot, because you see, religion has now become a taboo topic, and there are instances in which if you speak something which is contrary to what the general understanding is, more often than not you end up in a very bad taste, and the debate becomes really nasty. So I think the first thing that we need to understand is to have those etiquette of debates and discussion in which the other person should have a right to differ, and if he or she has a different view regarding certain aspects of religion, it doesn't mean that he or she is challenging someone other's beliefs. Everyone has a right to his own beliefs or her own beliefs, but we have a right to our own attitude in which we would like this space that we give to others to be granted to us as well. So I think, summing up what I've just said, I would say this two-pronged approach. First, which relates to attitude building, which means that the right to differ, because you see, we don't give people the right to differ in religion. This right to differ, this right to have a different opinion must be granted, and it has to be educated. Second, the point I would say is that revisiting some of the concepts which give us this impression regarding women, because as I said in my work, I have come across so many things, and more often than not, they are either misinterpretations of certain Quranic verses or some zaif or incorrect ahadith which have been circulating, or at times, as I said, just a pure cultural invasion of religious identities.
Yeah, I just want to announce, anyone who needs to open their fast can please quietly go ahead and grab water and a date. That includes me as well. But Dr. Zaidi, please go ahead.
Thank you. So Dr. Saleem, as I was saying in my opening note, that the Quran is both timeless but also time-bound. It's both normative, meaning it presents an ideal for human society, but it's also descriptive about what was happening in the 7th century in Arabia.
Right.
So the question becomes, when the Quran is dealing with those verses about men and women, is it describing the situation of 7th century Arabia, or is it prescribing how men and women ought to live forever and ever?
Right.
In particular, the verse about men being the qawwamun, the maintainers and the protectors of women. Is this a prescription for how men ought to be for all times, or is it describing what the situation was in 7th century Arabia, that men were the protectors and maintainers of women, and therefore they had certain rights over women?
Right.
Now, this is, I think, a very crucial question. When is it prescriptive about what ought to be the case, and when is it descriptive? And I think the failure to understand that difference is what leads us, Muslims and non-Muslims, to not understand the issue of equality and inequality. Because when it comes to inheritance, for example, when it says the daughter has half the share of the son, is that a prescriptive ruling forever and ever, regardless of society, regardless of economic system? Or is that specific to 7th century Arabia? And so on and so forth.
Right. So this is the fundamental question I think that you have raised, whether something is prescriptive or descriptive. And in my study, and as I said, my approach could be absolutely incorrect as well, but what I gather, that you see, in order to understand the Quran, the thing which really governs something very, very, I would say, closely is the context. So, I mean, you just cannot pick up a verse and say whether it's prescriptive or descriptive, because you see, it occurs in a paragraph. The paragraph is in a chapter. The chapter is in a larger framework. So basically, I mean, you have raised up very important questions. We can go at length to discuss why is it that, for example, daughters have whether it's a descriptive thing or a prescriptive thing. But my one-line answer to you would be that it is basically the context, and which rules or should rule. I mean, you may end up determining the context wrongly, but this is how we have to, look at things, that what exactly is the context. And the context is such a thing that if you try to be very conscious about it, it stops you at certain instances from generalizing a particular thing. And at other instances, it actually leads you to the fact that, yes, this is something of a descriptive, it's a prescriptive thing, not just a descriptive thing. So this is this is a very, very general answer that I give you. But yes, individually, if you pick up all these verses, I can, in my own interpretation or humble interpretation, I can maybe come up with my vision as to which of these verses is prescriptive and which of them is descriptive.
I just want to add one small point here. First, thank you for that answer. To discuss this in general in a very short time, I realize is so difficult. I guess to answer my own question in a sense, if you look at it from the issue of fiqh with respect to inheritance, what happens in the case when a man dies who has no children, sons or daughters or siblings or uncles or aunts? What happens in that case if he only has a mother and a father? From what I understand, in that case, according to the ulama or the fuqaha, those who deal with fiqh, the mother and the father inherit equally.
Yes.
So what does that tell us? If the mother and the father, the male and the female, inherit equally from the deceased, then the case of the son and the daughter is very specific in particular context and specific circumstances.
Absolutely correct.
And it does not refer to the inequality or equality between men and women.
Absolutely correct. So this is a very good example to show that it's not a difference between the male and the female gender, but the position which a gender would have. For example, if she's a mother or if she's a daughter. So they are not pitted against each other. So in the case of the father and the mother, they will receive the same share, which is 1/6.
So I think Dr. Ali Zadi has already had his follow-up, so I'm just going to give one final follow-up to Dr. Sadia.
Thank you. So I did mention in the opening about this concept of conscious building. How can we, and I'm just asking this is a question for all of us, I think we are all part of it, but more specifically from you, this disease morality is actually creating a lot of problem for us, okay? And what steps we should be taking? What is your recommendation? How can we cultivate healthy moral values or the conscious in human beings so that we can have these biases or this intrusive or aggressive or aggressive consciousness of movement can be changed?
Just before you answer, maybe I'm the only one who missed it, but I'm going to ask Dr. Sadia Akrampal, can you please define the term deceased morality just for the clarity of the audience and the scholar?
So I did talk about that concept, ego, superego. So morality, so basically these three elements are considered important according to psychoanalytic school of thought. And this is basically when we are giving information only about, like, as you mentioned, okay, do this, do that, what is right, what is wrong, okay, taking the notion of, okay, like dictatorship, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. So too much emphasis on right, wrong, it actually leads to a lot of mental health problems, maybe OCD, or obsessive compulsive, okay, anxiety-related issues. So when there is no player in the process of doing things, we are sitting here, we're enjoying this discussion, we are reading Quran, we are understanding Quran. This is a process that we enjoy. So no enjoyment, what is right, what is wrong, you don't have any understanding about the process, what you're doing. And same thing is, there's no reality check. If you're asked, open your eyes, there's daylight over there, you're not opening it. So there's no ego functioning over there. So there's no understanding of other parts, but only superego, which is highly emphasized, which results in mental health problems. So this is what I mean. And that leads to extremism, And that leads to fanatic notions in religion. So this is what is happening. People are bonding women to stay at home. Don't do that because they are threatened. They think they are having their own complexities, because when women come out, they will be competitors, and how to deal with this competition. So not to go in that. So I'm saying this diseased morality that has been created in the name of religion, what can be done as scholars or thinkers, what needs to be done, and
Right.
what are your recommendations?
Yes, this is a very, very important question. I think that one of the things that we might do, which might help, I mean, still thinking, but what comes to my mind immediately, is the fact that we need to empower our minds and our young minds especially, and tell them that as far as morality is concerned, it is an inbuilt phenomena. You already have it inside of you. I mean, you don't need to be taught what morality is. It's something that you're born with. And when you're born with, all that you need to do is to follow it. So what happens, on the contrary, is the reverse, and that is that before pointing people towards the moral values which we already have ingrained in ourselves, we try to first make that person a religious person by telling him that he's a Muslim, and his Muslim identity entails that he should do these things and not do these things. And I find Christians and maybe Jews also following suit. So what I'm trying to say is that if religion is taught after morality, which they already have inbuilt, and if they are reminded of the fact that this is the religion which God sent them with, it is common to every human being. It is something which even non-believers subscribe to. So by telling them that this is such a vast base in which we come together as human beings, and therefore this is something that we have to cling to, that I think that if religious concepts are introduced after this indoctrination, if I can call it, from our own inner self, that perhaps it would be more productive for them. Today what happens is that this morality is actually, as you said, it's a diseased morality because you are forcing it on people, and at times you're not trying to make them understand why certain things are to be done and not to be doing certain things. And it's like imposing a certain thing that you have, a concept that you have on the younger generation, or people who you think need to be religious. So yes, I would say that if you would just reverse this process in which this mindfulness regarding your own morality is made to overpower you, is made to tell you that you have this in your own self, and just follow what your conscience says, so follow what your fitrat says, follow what your instincts say, and don't worry about what other people think about you, or don't worry and don't judge other people. And then religion should be taught once this inner morality as a base has been founded and grounded deeply in a personality, and not the reverse, in which we teach religion first and then morals come, and so to speak, we end up in that dilemma in which we think that people have different moralities and therefore our morality is superior to them. So if we start morality with the fact that all mankind are inheritors of the same set of values, and therefore they are equal in that respect, and therefore you have to be respected for that, I do think that it might help in creating that awareness about morality.
Just small piece I can add from there. So it's not that we need to teach men how to respect women. I think it's very important for women to respect themselves.
Right.
Because this is the beginning point. If we are not respecting ourselves, how can we expect other people to respect us?
Absolutely.
Big round of applause for all our panelists. That was wonderful. I could have sat here for hours. And if there's a demand, I think we'll let you guys maybe flood our WhatsApp groups if you want something like this in the future. Maybe we can coordinate a virtual session or something as a follow-up. But thanks very much, everybody, and let's give them a real round of applause to show how much you really enjoyed that.